4. Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Tapping Teachers to Play a Lead Role in Shaping Common Core Implementation. My name is Alyssa Moronis and I am a contributing writer for Education Week. Today's webinar has been sponsored by Keys to Literacy. Today we'll focus on the role that teachers can play in shaping Common Core implementation. As districts across the country grapple with implementing the new Common Core state standards, educator Aaron Grossman is putting the strategy to work in Washoe County, Nevada's second largest school district, with the Core Task Project. The initiative has put teachers at the center of efforts to cultivate resources and professional development to support implementation. Today, he will share with us how his district takes advantage of readily available Common Core curriculum materials and how he and his team vet and test their effectiveness with teachers in their classrooms. He will be joined by Rachael, Etienne, of Student Achievement Partners, an organization that supplies these resources and helps educators strategize ways to effectively implement the standards. Now, just to introduce our guest today further, Aaron Grossman is the Core Task Project leader in Washoe County Public Schools in Nevada and one of Education Week's 2014 Leaders to Learn From. Aaron has spent his career in schools whose low-income populations were large enough to qualify them for federal Title I funding. He started teaching in Washoe County in 2002, and now as a teacher on special assignment in the district, he and his team, together with the district's teachers, are working to devise a set of best practices to help both teachers and students reach their potential through the Common Core. Rachael Etienne is a literacy and professional development specialist at Student Achievement Partners, a nonprofit focused on improving student achievement by ensuring that teachers are able to put the core standards to work quickly and effectively. She is currently involved in providing high-quality professional development services in K-12 schools, districts, states, and professional organizations. And now for a few technical details before we begin. Now is a good time to review some of the technical aspects of today's presentation. Please check the audio setting on your computer as well as your speaker volume settings if you're having any trouble with audio. If you are still having issues, please see our detailed audio troubleshooting file available in the Handouts folder at the bottom of the console. There are also other icons that open some additional feature panels in our webinar console. You can read about today's speakers in the bio panel, click the Handouts panel to download a copy of today's slides, and follow the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter using the hashtag EWWebinar. Finally, an on-demand archive of today's presentation will be available online in the next 24 hours. Both the archive and the free-to-download version of the PowerPoint slides will be accessible through edweek.org. And now, I'd like to hand the presentation over to Aaron.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. And if listeners here may refer to myself as a we, I'm not a collective, but rather it's a number of us who have done this work. And really, I just want to specifically mention Kathy Schmidt, Tori Palmer, and Angela Orr, who are just three remarkable educators. And much of the work I'll reference this morning and this afternoon has their handprints all over it. So I am Aaron Grossman. I'm a teacher on special assignment in Washoe County School District. And if you don't know Washoe, most people know where Reno is. And if you're curious where Wilson Phillips and the Go-Go's have disappeared to, they do lots of live performances in this area. Washoe also includes Sparks, Verdi, Incline Village, which is parts of Lake Tahoe, and Gerlach. We are a large district serving over 63,000 students, over 90 schools, and we're a majority minority school district with the majority of our students, or the majority of the minority status, being Hispanic. About half our kids receive free and reduced lunch, about 20% receive some kind of English language service, and over 10% of our kids have some kind of individualized education plan. So in short, I think we look a lot like a lot of large school districts. To sort of frame the work that we do, it's important to kind of visit 2011 when our district, like many districts, was wrestling with how do we go about implementing these new set of outcomes. And at that time, I think there were sort of three popular approaches. The first was you would turn to a publisher who would advertise some kind of CCSS material that you could purchase. It was also pretty popular to send people to conferences and in turn, develop some expertise there, and they could come back to the school district, something like a train-to-train model. Or you could invite somebody into your community who would describe how to go about implementing these standards. For a couple of reasons, we couldn't choose those routes. Principally, this was the Great Recession. We didn't have any money. But also because we thought, here's an opportunity to become expert ourselves before turning to somebody else to describe how to go about implementing these standards. And there are sort of three principles that guide this work that go about that ultimately led to the core task project. We'll wait for this slide to open. The first of these is this idea of making sure that the information we deliver is unfiltered. And what we mean by that is instead of becoming expert on something by going to a conference or inviting somebody else in, we thought, let's flip the script and allow people to hear directly from those people who were part of first the the Common Core State Standard Initiative, and then later the crafting and drafting and the adoption of the Common Core. So that included voices from the Council of Chief State School Officers, the National Governors Association. It included the authors themselves, people like Coleman and Pimental. We found video of work team members, Shanahan, Hebert. We found people who were part of that validation team, David Pearson, Karen Wixon, Lauren Risnick. And we even played, incidentally, those voices that later have said, have raised reservations, have had some remonstrations about the Common Core. So people like Stotsky and Milgram. Again, we allowed everybody to hear everything so that we could be as informed about these standards as possible. And in fact, we allow, the people who have done research around Common Core, people who have whose research was included in the Common Core, we try to find those voices as long as they are free, which led to sort of a second principle. So we wanted to hear everybody to hear sort of that voice unfiltered without an interpretation and all the biases that might go with. And the other piece for us was making sure that everything we promoted in our school district was what we described as vetted, scalable, and free. And I think people will understand what free means. It was the vetted and scalable, I think, was a sort of an important twist for us. So when we say vetted, we wanted to make sure where did the Common Core resource that we were looking at come from. There are no shortage, I'm sure as everybody knows, if you go on Google and you look for something related to the Common Core, you're going to get tens of thousands of hits. But it doesn't really describe where did it come from and whose lens from which the resource was written did go through. So we would always source where the resource came, and then we would match it to our own community standards and where we were as sort of a community culture, and then more specifically at the site culture. So we had the idea of free, vetted, and then scalable. We have no money, and so even if we found a good resource that may exist on an iPad, we realized with 63,000 kids, maybe 200 or 300 could fully take advantage of it. So anything we promoted, we wanted to make sure that every single school district in our community could take full advantage of it. So we had that first idea of unfiltered, the second idea of vetted, scalable, and free. And then finally, we wanted everybody to understand that this effort would take a lot of time. Interestingly, if you listen to that unfiltered piece, these voices that are intimately involved with the Common Core, they say the same thing. Teachers are going to need a lot of time. That this is not a revenue neutral activity, but instead it's as much about what you should stop doing and in favor of the new things that you may start doing. So we said that in every training, that teachers will need lots of time, and then likewise, students will need a lot of time as they wrestle with these new outcomes. So those were the three principles. And in the summer of 2011, the first video that we started sort of sharing to scale was of David Coleman. And it's linked in the PowerPoint here. And incidentally, all the resources that I may reference are also on our blog, coretaskproject.com. And so we shared the David Coleman video with a couple of people who in turn started sharing it with others. And this video of Coleman describing what would have to shift in order to access the Common Core became a real driver insofar as teachers taking it into staff meetings and saying, before, again, that we turn to a publisher or a national expert, let's attend very specifically to what these people who are involved in the process are having to say. And so it was teachers who really began to take this idea of the Common Core being an opportunity to liberate good instruction, to bring science, social studies, the history, the arts back into the classroom, they were an active participant in getting that message out there. So we started with Coleman, and as more and more people throughout the system watched the Coleman video, a very modest amount of money was released so that we could sub out some teachers to implement some of these shifts in their classroom. So we got enough money for 18 teachers. We took teachers very deliberately from throughout the system. So in buildings where 90% of the students qualified for free and reduced lunch, 90% of the students of some minority status, all the way to buildings where I think the only sub-pop might have been, male and female. And these 18 teachers came together, and we looked at a lesson that seemed to be well matched to these instructional shifts. And because we had to have a title for something, we called it the Core Task Project, and it became a 3-week frame. So in week 1, teachers would come in for a half day, and they would watch a review of the instructional shifts. It could have been the Coleman video that I alluded to earlier. We also found other people who described the shifts, again, who were involved with the Common Core. Following sort of a review of the instructional shifts, we also watched a video that was shared before the Testing Consortia Park on the close read strategy. So we watched that together as a community, talked about it, and then we took a lesson that we felt confident were matched to the shifts and to what was being asked of teachers in the classroom, and we reviewed it together before ultimately spending a week implementing it. So week 1 was some professional learning, looking at a lesson as a community. Week 2 was going back to our classrooms, implementing it. And then in week 3, we came together and we reflected. And the reflection was incredibly critical to us because we would literally type up all of the reflections, and then we would tease out themes to describe our next steps. So rather than us telling teachers what should happen in the classroom, it was really teachers and, more importantly, their students who were describing what we should do next. We added some extra professional learning so that people understood the features of text complexity. We described how the exemplars were built. And again, we shared some more unfiltered voices so that people were well aware of what the authors or work team members or validation team members were saying about these standards. Again, this 3-week frame, the PowerPoints and the resources affixed to them are all at coretaskproject.com. So following this 3-week frame, and to give you a little bit of a flavor here, what's going to load now are 2 exemplars that we used. The first was Feynman's text, The Making of a Scientist, and the second one was Emma Lazarus's poem, The New Colossus. And as this PowerPoint or this slide loads, just know that you'll see that there are links there. So if you wanted to see the very first exemplars we used in our classroom, you can click on those 2 links and then download them and share them within your community. So we started with 18 teachers in the spring of 2011. They reflected, and I'm confident that we would have been done before we had really started if it had gone poorly with their students. But what teachers reported out was students, despite the challenges of the text complexity, even being asked to retrieve evidence and supply reasons for why that evidence supported a claim, despite all of those obstacles and all of those challenges, they said their kids could do it. And again, these were students who were across the whole SES spectrum. Because of the success of those 18 teachers, we received a little bit more money so that in February of 2012, we actually subbed out 2 teachers from each one of our 63 elementary schools, so about 125 teachers in total, to go through the same process. Learn about the shifts, learn about close reading, apply an exemplar, come back and reflect on the experience. And again, I think we would have been done before we could have really started had those 125 teachers returned and said, this doesn't work with our kids. Instead, what they reported out was, our kids can do this. So at this point, I think Washoe can say pretty confidently that about 2,000 teachers have either moved all the way through the Core Task Project or at the very least looked at those instructional shifts and some of the resources matched to those outcomes. Even more flattering, we've had hundreds of teachers either pull down resources from our website and implement it themselves, or they invite us and they say, can you come and visit and let's talk about how we can go about sharing these outcomes within our community. And if you're curious, there's a link there to a YouTube video of our teachers describing what happened when they ultimately implemented a couple of those lessons I described with their kids. And the other thing I want to highlight finally is the resources. Oh, excuse me. Before I even get to that is what happened to that 3-week frame. So that core task project, which was just 3 weeks, we were challenged for what happens over a longer period of time with our kids, and could we sort of track student growth and their data as they experience the instructional shifts and some of these resources matched to them. That became the core task implementation project. It's an 8-month frame. Teachers from multiple sites come together, and we take a half day. We always engage them with some professional learning. They get a lesson. They take that through that Plan, Do, Study, Act model, and they come back and reflect. And as I noted earlier, we take those reflections, we type them up, and we see what is it that is so common among all of our classrooms that should drive our next professional learning. So we've done a lot of work around text complexity. We've brought in voices like Willingham, Pondicio, Deborah Myers to describe a coherent body of knowledge. And when I say brought them in, again, it's always video content. And I think I gravitate to video because that's what I do while I'm playing Legos with my kid. We've done a lot of work around writing. So if you don't know the resource In Common, we link to it, but it's also on a website called achievethecore.org. And we bring in voices like Diana Motes and Joey Hawkins to describe why we might make this shift from writing from sort of decontextualized prompts to writing to sources, and then again a resource match to it. We've done a lot of work around social emotional learning. What we heard over and over again from our classroom peers was kids were challenged by some of these outcomes that they were struggling with, sort of self-awareness or empathy. And so we've brought in voices like Coleman and Seligman and Gilbert and described very specific steps that are not just matched to SEL, but also to the Common Core, so that teachers feel confident that they're doing both simultaneously. And just to finish a couple off, we do some work around Learn, Does, Nick, and then we also link to a lot of lesson demonstrations. So that, again, as a community, we can watch a lesson, and then in turn, we can reflect on that, see what another teacher is doing, and then think about how we can implement some of the work they've seen in their own classrooms. And then I'll return to my last slide, which just describes some of the resources that we're using. And I would say, to be very, very clear, the resources themselves will be pretty irrelevant to most educators if they're not first fully aware of what might have to shift in their classroom. And I think once they have the sort of a solid understanding, and more importantly, they've heard that they've heard what it means or what has to shift through those people who've been involved with the Common Core, then I think they're more likely to take advantage of the first three you see, which have been large efforts, the Basel Alignment Project, Anthology Alignment Project, and Read Aloud Project. And I think Rachael may address those in just a moment. We built our own close reading exemplars in-house, and it says click there, which I realize you can't click on your screen now, so again, you can pull that off our website. But that's an Edmodo group that we maintain, where you can pull off a number of close reads in grades K through 6. We've built social studies units that all embed the instructional shifts as well as the close reading method in the units themselves. Where it says social studies CAR, those are close analytical reads, and those extend all the way from grades 4th through 12th. So in 7th grade, we have stuff from General Lee, an exchange between John and Abigail Adams. In 10th grade, Machiavelli's The Prince. In 12th grade, the Federalist paper on faction. So those are all, again, all freely available, not just for the members of our community, but for anybody who would want to take full advantage of them. And then finally, the last two links you see at the bottom. I've promoted the first one, the Core Task Project, but also at 63,000 resources. All of the resources that we've brought into our trainings, we house them there. So if you're curious, these other voices that I've alluded to, if you want to hear David Pearson describe why he validated the standards, if you want to see different lesson demonstrations matched to outcomes within the Common Core, those are all resources that we promote and we steer people to at that website. Thank you, Alyssa.
Okay, great. Thanks, Aaron. And now we're going to have a short word from our sponsor.
Hello, my name is Becky D. Smith. I'm a lead trainer at Keys to Literacy based in Raleigh, Massachusetts. We're so very pleased to sponsor today's webinar. Keys to Literacy is a professional development company specializing in comprehension, vocabulary, and writing. We know the key ingredient in affecting change in any classroom is the teacher. Teachers need solid strategies, time to practice them, and feedback on their use with students. And that's what Keys to Literacy is known for. I hope you will stay with us for a few minutes at the end of this webinar to hear about how Keys to Literacy has positively affected the way that teachers help students access, think critically about, and write about the complex text of the Common Core or any state standard. We are excited about the successes we've had and anxious to share with all of you. And we'll be back at the end of this webinar. Thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. And now I will hand the presentation over to Rachael.
Thank you. So my name is Rachael Etienne, and I work at an organization called Student Achievement Partners. Student Achievement Partners, as mentioned earlier, is a nonprofit organization. We're based in New York, and Student Achievement Partners was founded by several of the lead authors of the Common Core state standards. So on our literacy side, our heads were David Coleman and Sue Pimentel, and on mathematics, Jason Zimba is the lead on the math team. And basically, Student Achievement Partners was established to support the best possible implementation of the standards for teachers and for students. And so to do that work, especially coming from the lead authors of the standards, we had to be very sure to have some key core principles embedded in how we do our work. And so the first is that we don't hold any intellectual property. In fact, our goal is to create and disseminate as many materials as widely as possible. On our website, achievethecore.org, we're about as explicit as saying, please steal our tools. So we really do expect and want for folks to be able to take all of the learning that is happening across the country and make it useful in their own local settings. The second is that we don't compete for state or district or federal contracts. So, our money, we are privately funded, and, it puts us in a position of being able to work with states, districts, and the federal government, and to be very honest, when there's no money being exchanged, the ideas behind the Common Core are preserved and are priority. And then finally, we also don't accept money from publishers. It is our goal, again, if we do want to create and disseminate high-quality materials, we do have to engage with the publishing industry and want to be able to do that in the most supportive and truthful way possible. And so being able to have that kind of relationship with all stakeholders has kept us in a very honest and strong place in terms of supporting the implementation of the standards. So Aaron mentioned a few times in his talk, these key instructional shifts and what those ideas are, especially in ELA literacy. We have key instructional shifts in mathematics as well. But in ELA literacy, we think about the standards boiling down to three very important and very significant ideas in terms of what college and career readiness means for students across this country. The first is that all students, regardless of race, regardless of socioeconomic status, and regardless of their educational standing, all students should have regular practice with complex text and academic language. In the past 20 years in this country, we've seen a real move towards, leveling text and matching text to readers, which has, supported lots of readers in creating a volume of reading and making sure students are comfortable with reading. But in terms of moving students towards the ideals of college and career readiness and being able to handle the types of text that they will face in their college and in their technical or career training, it is going to be very important that all students have some sort of regular practice and exposure to complex text. And with that comes this notion of academic language, academic vocabulary. We sometimes hear that referred to as Tier 2 vocabulary, but the language that is most transferable and apparent in complex text. For number two, the next shift is this notion of reading, writing, and speaking grounded in evidence from text, both literary and informational, and really having students being able to engage with complex text and being able to draw from that text all of the knowledge and understandings that the author has meant for readers to be able to connect with. And so being able to employ and use evidence in particular ways is a real key shift in terms of what we're seeing students expected to do in their college and careers. And then finally, the third shift is this idea of building knowledge through content-rich nonfiction, and I kind of wish in parentheses it said literature as well, but you notice the word that's bolded here is knowledge. Really working to develop students' expectations for what they're reading, and that what is being read can actually illuminate you, it can teach you things, it can take you places. And so really being strategic in terms of what we are choosing for our students to read. And those are decisions that are made, in every local district or state, but really being aware and conscious around how we build knowledge and how we make sure our students are ready for ideas and concepts that they will be faced through college and career. So the real work behind Student Achievement Partners is around really promoting implementation of those key shifts through curriculum resources, through instructional practices. We even support some of the assessment efforts. And our professional development work has really focused around those first two ideas. It's curriculum and it's teacher practice, professional development. What will teachers and students have in their hands in their classrooms that are aligned to those key shifts? And what kinds of supports will teachers and students be provided to being able to access those ideas through the Common Core? So one of our first major professional development efforts came through these alignment projects. Erin mentioned the Basel Alignment Project, Anthology Alignment Project, and the Read Aloud Project. And they basically started because at Student Achievement Partners, we were getting calls from districts saying, listen, it's time for us to purchase curriculum. This is our procurement year. If we don't spend this money, we have money to spend on curriculum, and we want to know that we're spending money that is going to provide materials that are most closely aligned to the standards and will support our teachers and students. Unfortunately, at the time, this was around 2011, and still to this day, the market is not yet flooded with the types of quality curriculum resources that we'd like to see teachers and students working with. And so the idea here was to take what teachers and districts already have in classrooms. Half of the students in this country are taught to read through some sort of Basel reading program. And so we decided to take a look at all of the Basel programs, the leading Basel programs across the country. And we worked to take the stories and articles in those Basels and rework the instructional materials that were provided for those readings. So when we assessed first for complexity, we saw that actually the stories and texts that are used in Basels at this point were, sufficiently complex, pretty good quality in terms of knowledge building and the genres that were covered, but that the questions and tasks and activities that students were asked to engage in were nowhere near the shift around using evidence and coming back to the text to support thinking. So we worked with over 40,000 teachers now at this point. Over 40 districts were trained to literally open up their Basels and replan lessons that included text-dependent questions, activities, and tasks for students. We then place all of those lessons on an Edmodo site that is publicly available to everyone. And we now have hundreds of Basel lessons. We have close to 150 alignment project lessons, and we just launched a Read Aloud project just a couple of months ago and already have about 100 commonly used Read Aloud books for kindergarten through second grade with aligned resources available on that website. And so the power here around the alignment projects was the work in, really getting together with teachers, schools, districts across the country. It is, in fact, I remember one of the first opportunities I ever had to work with the teachers from Washoe County. Erin and Kathy and Tori were there at the first Basel Alignment Project and have subsequently become lead table facilitators at all of the other Basel, Anthology, and Read Aloud Project trainings all over the country in the last year and a half. So what's really appealing about this type of training was that it's easily replicated. And through the training, not only do you end up with great lessons and resources that teachers and all educators can use, but also it's just great professional development. Teachers got to work with each other, colleagues, to look at things like text complexity, what it meant to really develop text-dependent and text-specific questions, examined really interesting ways to highlight that kind of academic vocabulary that's present in complex texts. And then once the work was done and we were able to take all these lessons, folks were able to go back home and really started to become experts in developing curriculum, reviewing curriculum, being able to curate high-quality resources from other sources, and became experts in their own rights back at their districts. So if you are interested in sharing and using any of this work that has come from this entire movement, the Edmodo, if you go to Edmodo, and you'll be able to enter these 3 different group codes, you notice the Basal Alignment Project has lessons aligned for 3rd through 5th grade. Anthology Alignment is more middle school into high school, 6th through 10th grade. And the Read Aloud Project, which is just starting, is kindergarten through 2nd grade. And what's really amazing for you all to know about the Read Aloud Project is just next week, Student Achievement Partners has been invited to go to Alaska, and we'll be training the entire state of Alaska on the Read Aloud Project. So it's just really, again, wonderful curriculum-embedded professional development. The next kind of work that we do in terms of professional development and engaging teachers in the standards is this project called Teaching the Core. And what we've done is developed instructional practice guides. Again, Erin mentioned how the instructional practice guides have actually been folded into the activities of the Core Task Project. They are designed to basically highlight for educators what the core actions are that most exemplify good Common Core instruction. So what certain elements need to be in place in lessons that really truly show a move towards complex text, that really demonstrate students engaging in the use of evidence, and to really demonstrate that knowledge is being built over time in classrooms. So the instructional practice guides are really used as a coaching tool, a professional development tool. We've worked in districts where teachers have been working with each other to plan and kind of co-teach lessons. They give each other feedback on what kinds of elements that they're seeing, and again, all based on these really specific key practices that are aligned with good Common Core instruction. If you'd like to, I'm going to skip back, I'm sorry, I just moved ahead, but if you'd like to be able to see a copy of the instructional practice guides, we encourage you to visit achievethecore.org. You'll notice the footer at the bottom of the slides. All of the resources, all of the codes to access Edmodo, everything that I've discussed today is all available for free on achievethecore.org. And one last exciting thing to share about the instructional practice guides is that within the next few months we're going to have a digital version of the guides where you can interact with the instructional practice guide with an iPad or a computer in your classroom. And we have also started development on a lesson planning tool that is based upon a lot of the work that we did at the Basal Alignment Project, Anthology Alignment Project, and Read Aloud Project, and it kind of merges that lesson planning, that very organic lesson planning process with the core actions on the instructional practice guide so that anybody can kind of go through a bit of a tutorial and get a sense of how to plan lessons that are aligned to those key shifts. So visit Achieve the Core to stay tuned with all that. And then finally, Student Achievement Partners has a program called the Core Advocates Program. I don't think it's by mistake that several of our strongest core advocates come right out of Washoe County. Erin is actually one of our core advocates and has worked with us for so long. We really are, looking for educators across the country who have demonstrated leadership in the implementation of the standards. That could be, a lead teacher for a grade. It could be one brave teacher in a district who decided, I'm going to try a lesson or two. We've worked with folks at the district level, state level, and we come together about twice a year to share expertise, bring in expert speakers, other core advocates who can really share best practices in terms of implementation. And we can also kind of launch new initiatives with this small group of kind of trusted leaders. The core advocates and fellows are growing at Student Achievement Partners. We have a goal to reach 1 million teachers out there. So we're always looking for how we can engage with, support, and learn from educators across the country. And our core advocates program is very active on Twitter. So you'll notice the Twitter handle Achieve the Core, which is for Student Achievement Partners in general, and the hashtag core advocates will link you into all of the activities that our core advocates are engaged in. So we thank you, and again, would like to remind you to visit achievethecore.org and access any of these really wonderful, free, teacher-led, teacher-generated resources that we have available. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rachael. Now we'll move ahead to our question and answer session. And one question that one of our listeners had was, how can teachers make their voices heard in the decision-making process regarding the Common Core and how they approach curriculum? What are the best techniques for approaching their administration? If either of you want to answer that.
I'll give you sort of how we handle that, and then maybe Rachael has something that she might want to add. But for us, we try to make it not the conversation about us, but instead let's have the conversation about what one of these voices matched the Common Core is saying. So that's when I think, again, going back to 2011, where lots of people were describing their strategy, which not coincidentally cost a lot of money, around the Common Core that you could purchase or that you could attend a conference on. So there was a lot of noise about how people should go about doing the standards, and it was teachers who said, can we bring the Coleman video into our staff meeting and just have the conversation? Agree or disagree with the information. Let's just make sure that everybody's had an opportunity to hear this voice unfiltered. And so it's not our experience that, governance it refuses to allow that to happen. And then, again, it was our experience that once it was afforded an opportunity to happen, that it's persuasive, and then people would next logically ask, a series of follow-up questions. And the good news is there's lots of video. These people who are associated with the Common Core, they're alive and they're on YouTube. So it's just a matter of carving out a little bit of time to afford the conversation, and that, I think, has been deeply empowering for a lot of educators in our community.
And just to follow with Aaron's thoughts, from kind of a national and district perspective, we work with a lot of large agencies and trying to help think about what implementation looks like. But to be honest, some of the best work we've seen has just come from teachers, taking the reins and kind of leading their own learning, very similar to what was described in Washoe County. I think that's the most powerful aspect of the Common Core state standards, is that we live in a digital age. There's so much out there, so much good work that's happening, and there's nothing preventing teachers or small groups of teachers. There's nothing preventing those folks to get out there, get their information, and kind of forge ahead on their own learning. And that really great work will also get the district's attention, and we've seen that happen over and over again.
Okay. Now, next question: How can educators make sure that the resources they're using to implement the Common Core are actually closely aligned to the Common Core? What are the strategies for vetting those resources?
Okay. I think first and foremost, this notion of the key shifts is so important when you're thinking about evaluating materials. I think there are a lot of kind of basic alignment things that curriculum folks can do that kind of get to a surface level of the standards, but really looking for the ideas of the shifts and how they are exemplified through curriculum materials is really important. And so there are two very specific tools that I think have been incredibly helpful in helping educators make those decisions. And again, anyone can access them. The first comes through Achieve, and they have what is called the Equip Quality Review Rubric. And it is, again, structured around those key ideas of the shifts and provides a rubric and a framework for educators to be able to evaluate curriculum materials through 4 dimensions. Through just basic alignment to the standards, the key shifts, what kinds of instructional supports are provided in lessons or units, and then finally assessment, what kinds of assessments are provided. But the rubric has just been a wonderful tool and something that is kind of easy to use and friendly in terms of being able to look at individual lessons or units. The second tool comes from Student Achievement Partners, and it's called the Instructional Materials Evaluation Tool, short IMET. And it is designed, again, through looking at those key shifts, through looking at the standards, it is designed to look at whole curriculum programs. So those can be used to apply to like basal reading programs, or if your district has created its own kind of district or state-based curriculum, you can use the IMET to look at larger full-scale programs. But those two tools will give you a good sense of what alignment and quality looks like.
And predictably, we've used the resources that Rachael just outlined. And what I would add is I do think it comes with people need a little bit of information first. So the first part is having an acute understanding of what has to shift with the Common Core, those instructional shifts. But also, I would encourage people to watch David Pearson's webinar on why does he validate these standards. And I think armed with that information, the other resources become a logical fit.
Okay, thanks. And one listener was wondering, this question's for Aaron, what strategies have you used in Washoe to work with parents when you're implementing the Common Core?
There's a two-pronged approach to that. We have something in Nevada called the Nevada Ready campaign. They have a Facebook page. They're about to go live with their own website. And so they are at the forefront of sort of that communications around why Common Core and the impact for families in the community. Very specific to Washoe, we have something called Parent University, and we've designed courses for people to facilitate with parents. Those are all retrievable at Core Task Project. There's a frame on the right, so if you click on Parent University, we have two PowerPoints. The first one is sort of an introduction. It kind of gives you an overview as to why, some of the research, and gives teachers or parents some practical strategies to employ. And then there's a more advanced look where if teacher or families are interested, they can go through and experience viscerally what their students would be experiencing in our classrooms in Washoe. So they get to sort of play with some of the same curriculum and some of the same educational outcomes. So that's how we very specifically in Washoe communicated with parents around these outcomes.
Okay, great. And what are some ways, because I know it's important to have strategies that are replicable, so how do you make sure strategies are replicable, but also how do you make sure that teachers are still able to individualize their curriculum?
Okay, I can take a first stab at that. Well, first, just one of the ways for us at Student Achievement Partners, we're very careful and intentional about, as often as possible, we upload our lesson templates, for example, that were used through the Alignment Project, or any of the rubrics or guidance that we provide. All of those can be downloaded into Word documents. And that was really specific for us not to use PDFs, so that folks could take what was there and, put in their own ideas and materials. Districts have adapted those to align more closely with some principles and ideas that are really important to those districts. So that's one. The second also is that all of this work that we do has been designed kind of with the intention to scale. So every time one of these projects starts, the trainings have been, involved, and we really get a lot of specific feedback from the teachers and participants that work with us. And we know that it's not kind of a one-shot deal. We're not doing one training and then that's the end of it. That usually all of these professional development opportunities are part of the sequence, and that as materials evolve and improve, that we're also letting folks know that those improvements have been made, their voices have been heard, and again, everything that we have has no intellectual property at all. So we really truly kind of communicate the intent to tinker and specialize the materials that we put out.
And I guess I would add to that, I think, again, we've tried to keep people as well informed about the process as possible. And so when we do provide curricular resources, if people understand sort of where they came from, why they're of value to their students and to what they're ultimately trying to get done in their classroom, they're more likely to use them. What we don't prescribe, however, is like a pacing guide. So there still is a tremendous amount of professionalism and autonomy honored insofar as here are great resources. We're confident that if you understand the value of them, that they'll use them appropriately.
Okay, great. And one listener was wondering, what messaging do you use, or how do you handle teachers who are resistant to the implementation of the Common Core?
Well, I'm going to return to sort of why are they resistant? Because again, you can imagine the following, which is we take a Coleman video, we share it at a staff meeting, and there are people who are appropriately skeptical and have reservations, especially when you juxtapose some of the shifts that Coleman is describing relative to some of the work we've done over the last 15 years. And so when those come up, I think it's our responsibility not to ignore them, but to appropriately answer them. So when Coleman says, there's value in kids building a coherent body of knowledge. Now, although it's Coleman saying it, he's citing somebody else's research. And so that's when we hunt this down. I described, David Pearson earlier, but here's Dan Willingham describing why this is of real value to your kids. Or for that matter, when we say that we need to increase text complexity, well, apart from just taking a leap of faith and saying, okay, let's just start increasing text complexity, what's the research that informed that? So we share the metametric study, the ACT report, and again, we have work team and validation team members describing very specifically why increasing text complexity is real value to kids. So I think that engenders a tremendous amount of buy-in when you, one, appropriately answer the question, but more importantly, it's from a voice that I think people can feel confident are just sharing good research rather than trying to mandate something in a particular classroom.
Okay.
And Erin, I love that because really it's a return to evidence again. A lot of times we find that, making sure that we're always coming back to, the reasons why maybe teachers are resistant or what kinds of information is out there that will help kind of calm some of those reservations has just been such a humane way of approaching the conversation. But also, in addition to that, once you kind of get past some of those initial reservations, I think, what we've heard is the immediate notion of like, well, how am I going to get every one of my students to do this? I have, special populations in my classroom. I have particular needs of my students. Once we really start to shift the conversation to instructional supports, here's the standard, this is what it is, but how can we really support students in achieving those standards? I think a lot of that anxiety and resistance starts to go away because it really is, at the end of the day, about teachers and kids and being able to do, the really hard work worth doing. And once we're talking about that, it kind of, folks feel encouraged.
Okay, and another question, what's one of the best strategies that the teachers share lessons amongst themselves, and the best strategies for working together in a group?
Well, I'm going to maybe just start here, but we believe in small but mighty teams, and that, some folks, when you're working together, especially when you're working together on something new, really kind of pulling together folks to kind of practice with, really kind of get through some of the bumps, the initial bumps that sometimes happen when implementing something new. It's really important to have a lot of trust and close colleagues with you as you embark on the new work, but that as you're more and more clear about the goals, the expectations, the challenges and opportunities related to the work that you're engaging in, it's a lot easier to start bringing in folks at all kinds of different levels of support. Not everyone has to be a curriculum writer. Some folks show true talent in being able to review lessons and notice things. Some of your colleagues are great kind of model teachers. They can take a lesson and run with it and really show folks what it looks like in the classroom. So I think it's important to kind of work out the kinks first, but then also identify ways around implementation that everyone can support the effort. It doesn't all have to be one size fits all.
Yeah, and I would just, I think I alluded to it in one of my slides about just making sure that we carve out enough time for teachers to do the work. So that if we really value it as an outcome where teachers are creating curricular materials, that we give them the requisite time to do the work and do it well so that it doesn't feel obligatory or it doesn't seem like it distracts from other pressing concerns.
Okay. Okay, now turning to technology, what are some good new technologies that are useful in both developing curriculum for the Common Core and sharing it and then implementing it in classrooms?
Well, I don't know if this stuff is new. I mean, obviously we leverage a tremendous amount of video. And it makes me feel sort of guilty as a parent, but again, I do most of the video watching I'm doing while also entertaining my son simultaneously. So if you're interested, he does a wicked good impression now of David Coleman because he sat through so much of this content. So we leverage a lot of video, and I think that's an easy one because we know most of our classrooms have a way of playing back video. But then I think the other two pieces, we've built 11 discrete communities on Edmodo, and depending on the outcome, so some for social studies, some for close reading, some for what we call this core task implementation project. All those are listed again, both at 63000resources.com as well as coretaskproject.com. So we try to leverage that. So we create a virtual community where 4,000 teachers can be touching base with one another. And then, we have these two websites so that for us it's really, really important that our classroom peers are beat to beat with us. So Core Task Project is really a blog. So when I did this webinar, shortly before starting it, I posted everything that I'd be referencing today. And we do that anytime we touch base with principals or community, or for that matter, do a professional learning opportunity. It's always posted there so that anybody can opt into the experience and then be fully informed about what we're doing.
Okay, great. And I know you mentioned this earlier in the webinar, but what are some strategies for districts on a tight budget, especially right now, for implementing the Common Core?
Well, so we have no money, and that was before the Great Recession. I think we're last in per pupil spending. So it's really been, we joke that we bring the conference to us. So we know, like, for example, Doug Lamoff and Robert Fondicio did some great work in the Bay Area recently, and the good news is on Vimeo. So we take the responsibility of finding it. We watch all of it. We tease out sort of the most provocative or the most engaging content, or for that matter, maybe the most applicable and appropriate, and we bring that into our professional learning, or we just post it and say, this might be worth your time. And so that has been a big leverage point for us. And if you think about some of the voices that have the greatest gravitas right now in education, most of them share something for free online, and we take full advantage of that. And then Rachael described things like the Basal Alignment Project, RAP, and the Anthology Alignment Project. We take advantage of that. And then we also, our teachers, when they create materials, we have our own vetting process so that when something really rich and amazing goes live, we post it to one of the two sites I mentioned earlier.
Okay, great, thanks. And I think we'll have that be the last question. We'll go ahead and wrap up. But before we do, we'll have a quick message from our sponsor, Keys to Literacy.
Thank you. Thank you, Erin and Rachael, for this really informational webinar, and Alyssa for your moderating expertise. I only have a very short time, so as you look at the slides that I'm going to push, I will highlight some of the points from them that I think differentiate Keys to Literacy from other professional development providers. Okay, as I said, we specialize in comprehension, vocabulary, and writing. We know there is so much on the plate of today's teachers, but literacy is the plate. I think what highlights our program is not only do we train teachers and administrators, but we spend considerable time training coaches. The goal is to release the responsibilities to trained coaches who begin to give teachers that feedback they need to make effective strategies their regular practice. That's how good PD is sustained. This is a diagram of our training components. Again, the piece I would highlight would be the follow-up piece, that third yellow bubble. Teachers' sustainable professional development has to include some kind of follow-up, over which, again, can be provided by in-building coaches. We really help teachers practice with fidelity, and we're there to model that process and give that feedback. Obviously, the goal of all professional development is improved student results. Rachael talked about the importance of embedding strategies into what teachers already use. Teachers don't need another set of things. They use our strategies with their own text, their novels, their chapters in content books, their primary source materials, whatever text they use. And it's effective with advanced placement students, and it's a lifeline for learners who struggle. But it's your material. It's embedded. There are no other student materials in this program. Again, a hallmark of RPD is consistency and continuity. We have the key comprehension routine, the key vocabulary routine, the key writing routine, hence our title and logo, emphasis on that word routine. It works in all subjects, all classrooms. Literacy can truly be a building initiative, including your related arts teachers. Again, we hope you will contact us, give us an opportunity to talk more about what Keys to Literacy can do for your building or district literacy needs. Thank you so much for listening. And the contact information is on the slide. Call us or visit our website. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now just a few housekeeping details. We'd like to remind you that if you'd like to watch today's presentation again, an on-demand archive will be made available through edweek.org within the next 24 hours. You can also visit edweek.org to find articles that explore today's topic. And I'd like to